When a child is regulated, they are going to thrive. Hey, it's Kimberly, and I want to welcome you to the Supporting Autism Mama podcast, where we don't gatekeep our wins as special needs parents. Today, we're going to talk about something that I've had lots of questions about. I do want to preface by saying I am not an occupational therapist. I am just a mom who's learned several things over our 6 years in our autism journey. I do have a reference of my favorite book that has taught me everything that I absolutely know, and I'll reference that down in the descriptions in this podcast. Today, we're going to dive into a topic that I know affects so many of our kiddos: sensory processing. It's a word that gets thrown around a lot in our community, but we don't always talk about what exactly that means. Let's go back to the very basics. So at a very basic level, sensory processing is just the way that our brain processes information. And not just information, but sensory information. So think back to grade school when you learned about your senses. So in grade school, we learned we have 5 senses, and these 5 senses still apply to our kiddos: vision, hearing, taste, touch, and smell, right? So those 5 senses make up the auditory input that our children take in, the oral motor input that our children take in, the olfactory input that our children take in, the visual input that our children take in, and then our tactile input or our touch. So the 5 senses that we learned in school still affect our kiddos today, and those are a part of the way that they process sensory information. I also want to dive into 2 more sensory processes that are very important in our sensory kiddos, and that is proprioceptive and vestibular input. Proprioceptive input is going to be the way that our body feels grounded. And so basically what that means, think about jumping off of the couch or jumping off of the playground. When you jump hard on your feet. Your joints get compressed into the ground. All of that sensory information gets put into your body. Helps you to feel grounded. That's something that's very important and something that most of our kiddos seek pretty often. The last type of sensory input that we're going to talk about today is vestibular input. Vestibular input is movement of our body. So think balance beams, think swings. If you've ever been recommended a swing, it's probably because your behavioral therapist, your occupational therapist, your speech therapist notices that your child could benefit from vestibular input. Dive a little bit into our sensory processes. It's important for us as parents to have a basic understanding of these different sensory inputs because we're the ones that are around our kiddos the most. So we need to be able to look at our kiddos and say, hey, he's craving proprioceptive input. He's craving more vestibular input. Maybe I can add some visual input here so that we can build our day around their needs so that they are regulated. When a child is regulated, they are going to thrive. Personal example of this is I have an RBT that comes to the house once a week. When she comes in, she kept telling me, Maxwell's searching. He's constantly searching for something. It's going to be very hard for him to meet his milestones that he's struggling with if he's constantly searching. And at this time, I didn't really know what that meant. That is when I dove into everything sensory processing, but I didn't quite understand how to relate those words to my child. So I bought the book, How to Raise a Sensory Smart Child, and I dove headfirst into it. And it has changed the way that we understand sensory processing in our home. We've built an entire sensory room around the things that my children need. There are so many different sensory tools out there that you can buy for your children, and they're high dollar. Sensory tools are no joke. And I honestly believe that they can be game-changing for your children, but you need to know what tools to buy and why. And that's kind of what I want to talk briefly about today. Again, not an occupational therapist. I'm just a mother, but these are things that we have found to work in our home. These are the evidence-based practices that I have studied and been able to put into the information that I can talk about today. So we talked about our 7 senses. So we have our visual input, our tactile input, our auditory input, olfactory, oral motor, vestibular, and proprioceptive. So if your child is seeking these inputs, they can either be under-seeking or over-seeking. So these are going to be the terms that you often hear: sensory seeker or sensory avoider. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I remember looking at my children. I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old. Both are on the autism spectrum, both on opposite ends of the spectrum, for lack of a better word. My 8-year-old is a sensory avoider in a lot of areas. such an avoider when it comes to his oral motor that he eats no solid food for me at this time. He lives off of meal replacement shakes. His brother is an oral motor seeker. So he's seeking oral motor input. He seeks it so much that we have thousands of chewies around our house. Literally, we'll put everything into his mouth. Think of your kids that are constantly chewing on like the collars of their shirts. That is my 6-year-old. I have 2 kiddos, both on opposite ends of the spectrum. And I think that it's important to recognize the term sensory seeker and sensory avoider mean, because your child can actually be, they can seek in one area and then avoid in another. A perfect example, again, is my 6-year-old Maxwell. Biggest sensory seeker you'll ever meet. We have a swing hanging up a couple feet behind where my tripod's standing right now. He swings in that thing hours upon hours a day, constantly getting that vestibular input, and he craves it. He needs it. When my therapist told me that he was seeking night and day difference after we hung up the sensory swing, because he's constantly seeking that vestibular input. And when he gets that input, then he's regulated and he's ready to go. So he's a seeker when it comes to his vestibular input. He's a seeker when it comes to his proprioceptive input. However, this kiddo, when we're going to Walmart, we usually take a blanket with us. The lights are very bright for Maxwell in the store. So visually, he's a sensory avoider. The sounds in the store, we try to go early in the day, but sometimes that doesn't always happen. I like to teach my children that sometimes in life, we just kind of have to adapt. So I like to set up lots of things in the house for us to accommodate, but they also have to know how to adapt in the real world and be able to adjust accordingly. So sometimes we do have to go to the store when it's busy in the afternoon. And so at that time, it's very loud in the store, right? And he is a sensory avoider when it comes to his auditory input. So your child can be a sensory seeker and a sensory avoider. Can be a sensory seeker in multiple things and then a sensory avoider in multiple things. So it's important to be able to look at your specific child and have a basic understanding of all of these sensory inputs so that you know what's going to work best for your child. If you want a deeper dive into each one of the sensory processes, I do have a sensory processing journal that I do have available for purchase. It's priced at $2, really just for my time. And this sensory processing journal is going to help you to go sit down and be able to go through your child's day. I suggest looking at this journal, probably take a couple of weeks and go through each routine that you have for your child. You're going to be able to educate yourself about sensory processing, about what visual input looks like, about what auditory input looks like. It's going to give you just a brief overview of that. I highly recommend purchasing the How to Raise a Sensory Smart Child, which I'll link below in the description, to accompanying with these two. It's going to give you a brief overview of the sensory processes. It's going to then give you journal entry pages. And these I think are the most important because it's going to allow you to sit down and just observe your child, which is one of the best things that we can do as parents. Maxwell is often walking down the hallways, clapping his hands and stomping his feet. This tells me that he's seeking proprioceptive input. I didn't know that until I understood what proprioceptive input was and then sat down and observed my child. After I sat down and observed him and realized that he was seeking proprioceptive input, then I could figure out what tools I needed in my home. I think this is important when we are learning about sensory processing. When it comes to kids with sensory processing disorder or children on the autism spectrum, you see lavish sensory rooms all over the place, right? And sensory rooms can be a great tool and sometimes a necessary one. I think that they've made a night and day difference in our home. However, what we don't hear a lot is that each sensory room really needs to be tailored to your specific child. If your child is seeking lots of vestibular input, there needs to be lots of tools in that room that are going to give them that vestibular input into their daily lives. Things like your swing, your balance beam, your spinning chair. All of these things are going to provide that vestibular input that your child needs. So if you look at your sensory processing journal, it's going to give you a brief overview. It's going to give you a journal entry page so that you can sit down and observe your child and their needs. And then it's going to give you some of the tools that we've used in my home and just some basic tools about each sensory input that maybe you can try at home. Some of these things are going to cost you a little bit. I have lots of things linked in my Amazon storefront that I can link down in the description. I do try to provide some very cost-effective options. For proprioceptive input, you can have things like We have a plyo box that we got from the clearance aisle at Walmart. My kids do a lot of jumping off of the plyo box. You think your proprioceptive input, think a lot of heavy work. I don't know if you've heard that term before. Heavy work is exactly what it sounds like. Have your child push the laundry filled basket across the room. That's great heavy work. Over here in this corner, I have a jug that's just full of rice. They pick that up. Also a great form of heavy work. Great cost-effective form of heavy work. So don't go spend hundreds and thousands of dollars on all this sensory equipment until you understand sensory processing well enough to know exactly what your child needs and what's actually going to be a benefit in your home, what they're actually seeking or what tools they need if they're an avoider. Those noise canceling headphones, great thing for my 8-year-old. My 6-year-old will not put them on their head. For us, we tested a cheap pair of headphones to make sure that they keep the headphones on, and we were able to upgrade to the noise canceling ones for my older kiddo because the noise canceling headphones are like $300. It's not a cheap thing. I saw him walk in the park, made a huge difference in my child's life, who's terrified of storms in the springtime, but it was something that we had to save up for and be able to make an investment in. I think that there's lots of things that you can trial and error. There's lots of things that you can try to be able to get these tools met before you just go and just purchase all of the things that you see in all the pretty sensory rooms or online. Something that I just want to drive home, and I'm sure that as parents of children that do have sensory processing, hopefully this is not something that I have to say, but I'm going to say it anyways. Sensory processing challenges are not behavior problems. A lot of times in the school setting, out in public, it looks like your child is having a really hard time, and it's because they are having a really hard time. Think about when you're driving down the road and you have maybe MapQuest up on your phone. You're looking for a new place that you've never been before. So your senses are heightened because you're in a new environment, someplace you've never been, and you're really trying to listen to those directions so you don't miss your turn. Have you ever been driving down the road and you turn down the radio noise while you're driving so that your senses can focus on that one task at hand? This is how your kiddos are living every day. They're constantly living with that loud radio noise. Our job as parents to be able to find tools to help regulate that volume. Observe your child, be able to see what tools they need so that they can regulate and be able to perform everyday tasks, be able to perform better in school, be able to meet their milestones. Sensory processing, I really feel like I could talk about for hours because it has made a night and day difference in my children's lives. Once they were regulated, we have been able to grow exponentially. Another tool that I provide that I can also link down in the description is just a sensory diet template. Sensory diet sounds like it's something that you're going to do in the kitchen. It might affect their nutrition, but that's actually not what a sensory diet is at all. A sensory diet is just a routine that you implement into your home that's going to help them get those sensory inputs. For Maxwell is constantly craving that oral motor input that I talked about. So one of the things that we do first thing in the morning is I have some wintergreen Mentos. So they're super strong Mentos. I give him a couple and it helps to wake up his mouth and wake up that oral motor response. He's a sensory seeker when it comes to oral motor. Those senses are under processing. So to help wake up those senses, I give him a Mento in the morning and it helps to wake up those senses. I give him a Chewy that also helps to wake up those senses so he's not chewing on my baseboards when I'm trying to get other things. For example, would be on Monday mornings, we live super close to our tornado sirens. So we live in Missouri, live right through Tornado Alley. So we have tornado sirens that go off just as a practice every Monday at noon. So my 8-year-old knows every Monday at 11:50, it is time to go grab our noise canceling headphones and put them on our head. That is just part of his sensory diet. There's different routines that you can do every day to help give your child the sensory input they need. This might be as simple as going to the park, helping with lawn, have them help push that basket across the ground to help give that proprioceptive input that they need. You do not need to go spend thousands and thousands of dollars in order to get your child sensory input. I promise that you can find ways to do it at home for very, very low cost. I'll be completely honest. When I found out about sensory processing, it completely changed everything and unlocked an entire world that I had not been familiar with prior to this. It changed the meltdowns that I was seeing over and over again to just cries for help. It allowed me to look at their surroundings different. When my child was having a hard time, be able to know to look at my surroundings and see what was happening externally to cause my child to have so much distress. Was it the lights in the room? Was it the sound in the room? Were they just needing more proprioceptive input or more tactile input? Did they need squeezes to help calm down their body because they were so overwhelmed and overstimulated with the environment around them? It's so important to observe your child, to be able to record that information and then learn about these tools and what your child needs, because every child on the autism spectrum is unique. Just because they have a diagnosis of autism does not mean that this is one size fits all. Every child is unique in their own right, just like every single one of us is unique and different. Understanding sensory processing allowed me to build a connection with my child. It allowed me to understand that this was his form of communication and he needed help and he needed me to bridge that gap. My job now as an advocate for parents on the autism spectrum is to hopefully be able to now bridge that gap for you. I have created a course that I will be uploading shortly that will allow us to take a deeper dive into sensory process. I will give you the resources and the tools that we have used in our home to help make this a success. If you have found something useful in this video, please consider giving me a like. If you found 2 things useful in this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. Every subscription helps me to build and grow and be able to create more and more content like this for you so that we can bridge that gap between the time of diagnosis to adjusting to our new normal. And as always, make sure to follow me over on Instagram. I'll put the handle down at the bottom so you can see our everyday tips and tricks.